All right. Welcome to Seabird University, our second session this fall. My name is Nicole Lucas, and before I pass it off to Bruce for all of the presentation, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. There will be a Q&A section at the end, and you can submit all of your questions through the Q&A box in that toolbar at the bottom of your screen. If you can also use that if you have any questions. If you're having any issues with sound or video or anything, you can either raise your hand or pop that in the Q&A, and we'll try and work with you to get that sorted. This session is going to be recorded, so you'll have access to it, I would say, within the week after the session if you want to go back and revisit it. And with that, I will pass it off to Bruce.
Thanks, Nicole. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this Seabird University session on the Seabird Scientific Community Toolkit for CTD processing. My name is Bruce Rhoades. I'm a senior engineer on the external software team, and I've been with Wet Labs and subsequently Seabird Scientific since 2001. Today, I will be showing you where to access the toolkit, one of the many approaches to getting it set up for use, and then reviewing what's in the toolkit and how to make use of it. Off screen here. The rest of the workshop. So, historically, Seabird Scientific has presented information regarding the processing of data from our instruments as part of our users' guides or app notes or white papers. We have learned that those documents have not always been entirely clear and that they sometimes have a tendency to become outdated. When we began working on Fathom several years ago as the successor software to the CSoft suite of programs, we recognized there was an opportunity to make use of Python programming language to provide our customers with tools that they could use to better understand how the data is being processed by our applications, and also to customize processing to match their specific needs. We spent a significant amount of time attempting to incorporate Python code directly within Fathom itself, but due to some technical challenges, we were unable to accomplish that goal. So, still wanting to provide a toolkit to the community, we chose to concurrently develop the toolkit Python code in tandem with its corresponding code in Fathom. Please know that we have gone to great lengths to ensure that the Fathom and toolkit code provide nearly identical results to the best of our abilities. So, where to go about getting the toolkit? We have created the Seabird Scientific repository here on the Seabird Scientific organization on GitHub. So you can go to github.com/SeabirdsCientific. This is a little bit different view from what you might see, as this is the developer view where I have access to our non-public repositories as well, but you will see something similar. And right there near the top center will be the Seabird Scientific repository. As you can see here, for those of you familiar with GitHub, it's your typical GitHub repository with all the bells and whistles there. For those of you who are not particularly interested in doing the full checkout from GitHub, we have also published a package for the Seabird Scientific Toolkit on the Python Package Index, also known as PyPI. If you go to PyPI, you can search for the Seabird Scientific project. Please note as well, at the end of this presentation, we'll have a slide with a number of references so you don't need to remember these URLs and other application specifics. Getting back to the repository, now I'm going to jump into the process of making use of the toolkit. As I mentioned earlier, this is just one of many ways to set up a Python code and an environment for developing or running code. Included in the references will be some other approaches to installing the toolkit under different development environments, and some resources for other approaches that you can follow up on if you're so inclined. So today, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code and the GitHub desktop application. So first off, the first step is to clone the repository to your local drive. Clicking on the code button here, you'll see a number of options. For today, just to keep things simple, I'm going to choose to open it with the GitHub desktop application. Clicking on that, you'll see we've switched over now to the GitHub desktop app. It has pre-filled in the URL for the repository, along with a suggested local path on the local drive. I'm going to go ahead and use that directory that it suggested. A few moments here while it pulls in the information from the repository to the local hard drive. And here we go. The repo is now checked out to my local drive here under the repository Seabird Scientific, and there you can see the path to it. You'll also notice here's a history of all the pull requests and changes to the repository throughout its existence. Likewise, you'll notice there are a number of branches to the repository. All these other branches, aside from main, are primarily developmental branches. You can see some of these have languished a bit and may not be fully up to date. We recommend everyone use the main branch, as it is the repository that has been vetted for public consumption. Next step is to actually start making use of the files that we just cloned. So I'm going to jump over here and use this built-in Open in Visual Studio Code button. For those of you not familiar with Visual Studio Code, it's a freely available application from Microsoft. That's a great editing and development environment that has a lot of extensions for Python that we've found to be useful in developing and debugging Python code, as well as the Jupyter notebook that we have chosen to use to present the toolkit introduction to customers. Here on the left, you'll see this is the Seabird Scientific GitHub folder. Couple of hidden directories in here related to GitHub and Visual Studio Code itself, and then the rest of the documents, the files that we've developed for the repository itself. Within the documentation folder, we have some example data. Here is the Jupyter notebook itself, as well as all the rest of this and files that we will be getting to in a moment. Next step, we recommend setting up a virtual environment for any Python applications that you may be working on. This constrains the packages that are checked out for the project into a controlled folder situation, so that changes to a package in one project that a user may be developing on don't unnecessarily impact other projects if one is using a global Python environment. So within Visual Studio Code, setting up a virtual environment is fairly simple. Going to select the Create Python environment. And you'll see here it presents two options, two different flavors of virtual environments that you can choose from, the VENV and the Conda. Each of these have their own specific attributes and properties. For today's purposes, I'm going to choose the VENV. Note that the Conda environment will work just as well. Next up, the VS Code is going to say, okay, which Python interpreter do you want me to use? I'll mention here that the toolkit has been developed requiring a minimum version of 3.9 for the Python interpreter. 3.10 and other newer ones work as well. But for the purposes of today's demo, I'm going to go ahead and go with the 3.9 version that's installed on my computer. One last step as a convenience, we have provided a set of packages for developer dependencies. This will, if you're going to be developing anything from the toolkit, suggested that you check those out as well. They're included down here in the PyPI file if you want to do any further digging. Okay, so clicking on the OK button here, you'll see that the environment is starting to be created. We've got this local.venv folder where the environment's being set up, all the libraries being checked out from pip, and all of that. So whilst this is busy, let's get back to the repository here on the web browser. Again, you'll see the similar folders here in the structure in the repository. Let's get down to the README here. As with most GitHub projects, the README provides some information on the project itself. We'll note that the toolkit consists of three primary things. The underlying Python code that we use to do the conversions and calculations and plotting. Some example instrument data that we make use of in the toolkit. And the third part is the Jupyter notebook that I've referred to. This is a good process for including documentation and executable Python code within a single file or platform. Makes learning what's going on and following along with the documentation all the easier. Links to some of the documentation folder, instructions if you choose to just install directly via pip, and then some example imports if you want to just jump in and start developing your own Python code, some examples of imports. Again, required version 3.9, and then a few notes about the Jupyter notebook. If any of you aren't interested in doing the whole checkout and installation and setup on your computer and just want to peruse the notebook in a static form, we've included within the repository a PDF version of a rendering of the notebook. Just scrolling through here, you can see the documentation portion of it, and then offset is the Python code itself. And the various modules and things that go on. This has been run through, the toolkit has been executed, and so the various plots that one sees from running the toolkit have been included in this static version. And one last thing, please note that the toolkit is not intended to be a fully open source project at this point. We're not opening things up to pull requests from everyone at this point. We're going to, at our discretion, decide whether any code developed by the community in relation to the toolkit should be included or not. And as always, you are free to go ahead and fork the repository and do any development work for your own purposes. We do ask, though, that you adhere to the MIT license, a copy of which has been included here in the repository, just to give credit where credit is due and the source of the work that you have done your derivative work from. Lastly, if any of you are interested in new features or instruments that you'd really like to have added to the toolkit, please reach out to us and let us know. Best route for that is through the CBIRD Scientific Support email, and they will get that information on to us. We are definitely interested in responding to what the community is looking for in the toolkit. And towards the end of the presentation, we'll have a list of some of the future features that we're looking to add as well. Okay, let's get back to VS Code and see where we're at there. The environment has been created. Now we're ready to just jump right into the notebook itself. Again, this is going to look very similar to the PDF portion, with the difference in that now we can actually execute the Python code within the notebook. For those of you who may be familiar with SVE data processing or with the data processing portions of Fathom, these modules in here are going to look very similar. As I mentioned, we've tried to keep things as consistent and up to date as we can in the toolkit with Fathom. As of late, we've lagged a bit in terms of the toolkit, but we have, as I said before, we have plans to bring some new features in to get things back more up in sync with the Fathom development. Within this list of modules, within the notebook, we've got some convenient hyperlinks. Say you want to just jump down and take a look at cell thermal mass. You don't need to scroll down through all the other sections. And for convenience, if you want to get back to the index, we've got hyperlinks within the code to bring you back to the table of contents. Let's jump into it. This first section is not listed in the modules. It's just some background setup work to import various third-party and internal packages that we need for the toolkit. You'll see here we've got the Gibbs Seawater toolkit for Python as one of our imports, as well as the ever-present NumPy and Pandas packages as well. So to execute one of these cells of Python code within the notebook, within Visual Studio Code, it's a simple matter of just clicking on the execute cell button here. It's going to ask me one more time here because of the new setup, which Python environment I want to use to execute the notebook in. And again, we're going to constrain the notebook to be using the VENV Python interpreter. Keep things just consistent. And it went by pretty quickly, but you'll see there's a little success checkbox here that the cell has been executed the time that it took, as well as an up counter on the number of cells that have been run within the notebook. In addition to the imports, there have been some setup of some variables and plotting things, just some background work. So now down to data conversion, we jump into the first of the real meat of the modules in the toolkit, or in the notebook, excuse me. You'll see here's a list of the current instruments that we're supporting. These were the first that we pulled in with Fathom, the SB 37 family of CTDs, along with the 19 plus V2. Fathom currently, in its most recent release, supports the 39 plus. That's one of the additional features that we'll be bringing into the toolkit in the not too distant future. While we're here, I'll also mention that at present, Fathom and the toolkit only support the current versions of firmware for these instruments. If some of you have older versions of the firmware, you may find some inconsistencies or challenges using this code. If you do, we ask that you go back to resort to using the CSoft suite of applications instead. We unfortunately just don't have the resources to go back and catch up with all those previous versions of firmware out there. So down to the code, executing the code itself. One of the nice things about VS Code is that it provides the opportunity as well for setting breakpoints, stepping through the code, stopping, examining variables, stepping into functions and seeing exactly what things are doing as they go on. So to actually jump into debugging of one of these cells, rather than clicking on the execute cell button, we go to the drop-down and choose the debug cell option. This is going to fire off the debugger and begin execution of the cell. This takes a little bit of setup time. And now you can see execution has stopped at the breakpoint that I specified and has run through these functions up at the top, creating a hex file path, which you'll also notice there's a section of variables over here on the navigator bar side of things with the path that we've created to the input hex file that we'll be using. And if we scroll down a little bit here, you'll also see here is the raw data array that was generated from reading in the hex file path that was specified above. You'll see that it has temperature, conductivity, pressure, the internal temperature, all of the internal sensors, as well as 4 columns here for external auxiliary analog instruments. I'm going to jump back just a second here and take a look at the example data file. So here's this sample file from the 19 plus V2. Those of you who have been longtime customers may be familiar with looking at these. There's some header information, including the file that was collected, as well as some other pertinent information. Here you can see where those analog voltage, external analog instruments were enabled within the instrument itself, the calibration coefficients, and then the actual hex data itself that was uploaded from the instrument, either using CTerm from the CSoft suite or Fathom. You look at files. Let's get back to the notebook. Now that we've got our array of raw decimal values, next step is to convert them into their engineering unit equivalents using the appropriate calibration coefficients and other dependencies needed to generate those engineering unit values. Not going to step through all of these, but just do a quick review. Here you can see we're calculating the temperature, engineering units from the raw values, as well as the calibration coefficients, choosing the flavors of conversion, as well as whether we're putting in Celsius or Fahrenheit. Likewise, there's another function for converting pressure, which is based on the raw pressure data, as well as the raw temperature compensation values. And lastly, the conductivity is calculated using those previously calculated temperature and pressure engineering units values, along with the raw conductivity and the calibration coefficients associated with it. Lastly, down here, we have a plot function, which is going to plot all of the calculated engineering units versus depth. So let's just continue. Just a quick overview. When you're in the debugging of the Python code within VS Studio Code, there are various options to rerun, step into and out of functions, skip over functions, and just continue on. So we're going to just continue on and run through the rest of the cell. And here you can see it did those conversions and executed the plot function to show the results. We're using the Plotly package, Python package for graphing. It's got the similar tools that you may know from Python with zooming and capabilities and scrolling and all of those good things. See, there's opportunity to zoom in, auto zoom back out. You can export it to a PNG. Slide values around, all that stuff that you might want to use when analyzing your data. The next module in the notebook is the low-pass filter. Those of you who might be familiar with the SBE data processing manual, these formulas are going to look very familiar. We have reproduced the documentation in the SBE data processing manual here. So we have all the equations, the recommendations on values to use, excuse me, along with the code itself. We're looking to move in this direction because we as the developers have a lot more control over when this gets published, and we can more quickly and responsively make changes as they need to be made. So this is another benefit of the Jupyter Notebook, is being able to keep that documentation and updated and current in a more timely fashion. Down here is the actual code to do the low-pass filtering, which essentially is taking out high-frequency components in the data that may be due to just sampling artifacts rather than actually inherent properties in the water being sampled. You can see here what we're going to run low-pass filters on temperature and conductivity with a 1 second time constant. Again, matching the sample interval of 4 Hertz that the instrument used when collecting the data. And so we'll go in and plot the results. And you can see in here, here we go with the conductivity and the filtered conductivity. You can see the high frequency aspects have been removed from that data. You may be saying, okay, maybe I want to look at the temperature. It's a fairly simple operation here to just come back and change filtered conductivity to filtered temperature. Click go, and there we go, where we have now switched it over so that we're plotting the filtered temperature versus the engineering units temperature. You can see again, some of those high frequency components have been filtered out. Align CTD function, again, from an SBE data processing, the point of this module is to align water volumes with the pressure sample such that the data is aligned so that the same sample volume of water is being compared These delays may be caused by either physical distance between sensors on the profiling package, inherent time delay in some of the sensors themselves, and then if you have a plumb system, the time it takes for that slug of water to move through the plumbing from one sensor to the next. Again, there's a lot of detail in here. Free to peruse these later at your own leisure, along with alignment suggestions for oxygen. But to keep things brief today, we're just going to go ahead and continue on. Here are two samples of aligning the temperature, the filtered temperature data from the previous step, with the pressure using an offset of 0.5 seconds and 10 seconds. So running that, as you can see here, we've gone ahead and done those adjustments. You zoom in, you can see that the 0.5 second delay, not nearly significant, it's a 10-second delay. Say, okay, that 10-second delay seems pretty aggressive. Let's go back and see what it looks like with 1 second. Again, it's a fairly simple process of just changing that value, rerunning the data. And now you can see those are much more consistent with the 0.5 second, 1 second time delay. Cell thermal mass module, this is for correcting conductivity due to the thermal mass of the conductivity cell itself. Again, these are fairly well-known calculations for our CTDs, again with the formulas and some hyperlinks to the theory behind these equations. Again, fairly simple matter of calling the thermal cell mass function with the filtered temperature and filtered conductivity values, along with some amplitude time constant and the typical 4 Hertz sample interval for this data set. So running through that, we'll scroll down and take a look. And here you can see the filtered conductivity and then the corrected conductivity. It's a fairly subtle conversion, so we need to zoom in a bit. If you look very closely, there's a green line there and a purple line there. One of the nice features of this plotting package is that if you do have 2 traces that are fairly close to each other, you can go in and turn one or the other off to make it clear and ensure that you are actually seeing what you think you're seeing. Again, if we zoom in a little closer, you can see how subtle those temperature changes are, or how those conductivity changes are due to this thermal mass of the conductivity cell. Loop edit, this is another one of our well-known processing modules that takes out, sets bad flags on data that are deemed to have either had pressure slowdowns or reversals, typically caused by shift heave, or if there are significant changes in the velocity of the CTD. This function can also be used to remove surface soaks if you have had your profiling package sitting at depth to get bubbles out before starting out your profiling. Let's go ahead and run through that and take a look at the plot. And you can see some of the surface data has been taken out, as well as some gaps in here where it looks like there was some ship heave going on. And the profiling package may have been going back up in the water column or slowed down significantly enough that we want to sort of skip over that data and ignore it. Now we're down to the TS10 or the excuse me, thermodynamic equations of seawater from 2010. In this case, for the toolkit, we are making use of the Gibbs Seawater Toolkit in Python. And those calculations there that are fairly well known by the community and have been embedded externally. As you can see, there are quite a few derived variables that are provided in the toolkit, any number of them that you might want to use for your research purposes. We're just going to run through a few of them today. We're going to take the corrected conductivity, the filtered temperature and pressure, and calculate salinity. Then from the salinity, we're going to calculate absolute salinity. And then building on that, we'll calculate the conservative temperature and the density. And wrapping it all up, we'll go through and plot the group. Here you can see the calculated salinity and absolute salinity along with the density function. A few more. We're going to go ahead and calculate the adiabatic lapse rate, the dynamic enthalpy, and go ahead and plot those. I will note another one of the bugs we discovered here is that this is labeled as loop edit rather than say TEOS 10 or adiabatic lapse rate, whatever. That you can expect that we will work to get that updated in the next release. Wild edit is similar to loop edit in that it flags outlier data and removes it from visualization. I'm going to go ahead and run this now, but with the caveat that during testing for this presentation, we discovered that wild edit has some bugs in it. So the gaps that you're seeing here are still remnants from the loop edit. None of this data has been affected by the operation of the wild edit command. Note that we have a bug ticket created for it, and we'll be hopefully correcting that in the not too distant future with the next release of the toolkit. Last module here in the notebook is the window filtering, which provides options for a number of different shaped filters that can be applied to the data along with various parameters, or the median filter is also an option as part of this filter package. In this example, we're going to do a boxcar of 21 sample width, again at the 4 Hertz, and run that through. This is the resulting plot for that. Again, zooming in, you can see the effect that the boxcar filtering had on smoothing that underlying data. That's it for the Jupyter notebook. I'm going to move on to the actual code itself here. Briefly touched on this before. Here's our documentation folder. The Python code itself is buried in this source/SBS folder. You can see we have 2 primary folders here. One that's some supporting Python code in support of the plotting and visualization. The other one, the process folder, is the main folder that has the meat of the Python code that's doing the bulk of the work here in the toolkit. As with the flow through the notebook, you can see we've got all these files that follow that same flow. Instrument data, this one is involved with the process of reading that hex data from the instrument into the Python code to make use of it. You can see we've got doc strings here at the start of each of the files that include the classes, some enumerations that may be used elsewhere in the code, and then a list of the functions and their parameters. One of the other nice features of Visual Studio Code is when examining the source code itself, there's an option here that lists where some global variables and classes are, as well as the functions themselves. So it's a convenient way to just skip down within the code to the specific function that you're interested in. Again, we've got doc strings for the function, the quick overview, arguments that it expects, and what it's going to return, and what it might do if it encounters any issues. As you can see here, this function is for reading in 19+ hex values. So it expects a string. It processes it line by line. So it expects a hex string that was pulled from the end of that hex file, as well as a list of the sensors. Processing needs to know how many sensors were in there, as well as what mode the 19+ was operating in. The data within that hex file is slightly different depending on whether the instrument was in profiling mode or morgue mode. Again, this list of sensors for the test data that we're looking at will have 4 auxiliary analog sensors within that data. It's expecting 4 analog sensors within that data as well. So here you can see it's going through, it's pulling out the temperature, conductivity, and pressure data, and converting that to the raw decimal units. as well as if there are any analog sensors that were included, and a section here which we didn't include in the sample data, but if the 19 plus had any auxiliary serial sensors, processing for that connected sensor can also be handled here. Once we've got our data pulled in, we have the conversion steps. Again, here are all the conversions to get from that raw decimal data into their converted engineering units. So you can see here the primary temperature, conductivity, and pressure, as well as density, and then also conversions of those auxiliary sensors from their raw decimal units into their engineering units. Lastly, the processing. Again, here you can see a lot of the filtering and calculations that were performed in the notebook that we were examining earlier. One last thing to go through here with the Jupyter with VS Code. One of the things that we've included in the repository is a set of unit tests. For those of you not familiar with what unit tests are, they allow for the automated testing of a function by applying known data to the function and then examining the results to see if they how well they compare with the expected results. Might seem a little bit esoteric for some of you, but I have found unit tests on existing code to be a great way of understanding, stepping through and seeing what the operation is on a particular function to get a better understanding of how it works. Let's go ahead and pull up the instrument data unit test file. Looking at the code here, you'll see a number of little green arrows in the gutter. These indicate where each of the various unit tests are. This particular file has 4 of them. There are a number of ways of running the unit tests. You can run a single test at a time by just clicking on the green arrow. Notice that down here it gives the run results and a nice little green check mark. Likewise, it changes the icon over here in the gutter. It's also possible to run the entire file by just clicking Run Tests. This one takes a little bit because it's setting up everything for the entire file. And we'll wait just a moment whilst this unit test runs. I will mention that it's also possible to set breakpoints and step through the unit tests and debug them. Unit tests are very helpful for us as developers in revealing instances where changes to one function may inadvertently impact the operation of another function that we weren't expecting. So again, here are the results. All 4 passed. Most of it, obviously, the time to actually run the test was much less than the actual setup for running the entire thing. Alrighty, back to the PowerPoint. Here was the setup steps that I ran through. These can be used for later reference if you don't want to go back to the video. And then finally here we have the list of upcoming features that we've identified that need to take place that have been incorporated in Fathom or just things that need fixing here. The CNV output files from Fathom, we want to be able to bring those in here as well. We added some support for reading cal coefficients from XMLCon files. That's another good one that we'd like to bring into the toolkit. The most recent release of Fathom included support for the 39 plus instruments. We want to bring those into the toolkit as well. And then the buoyancy calculation that's now in Fathom, and then as well as the some loop edit fixes and the wild edit fix that I mentioned here during the demonstration. Okay, that concludes the overview for now. Going to stop sharing my screen and we can jump into the Q&A session.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Looks like we already have several questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and get started. The first is the SBE 25 plus CTD supported? I need to do alignment for some data with this instrument.
No, not yet. So unfortunately, we won't have that customization in place yet. We ask that you use the SBE data processing and other CSOP tools for that instrument. Again, as we mentioned, if you have instruments that you're particularly interested in getting into the toolkit, let us know, and we'll prioritize those based on time available and customer feedback.
And then the next question is, can one read calibration coefficients from the XML.conf file, or are they also included in the hex file?
Okay, both. The ones in the hex file are recovered from the instrument itself. The XML.conf is an external file that customers can update and modify. We also provide XML.conf files from the factory with the instruments or following calibrations. So yeah, either way, as I mentioned in our list of upcoming features, the toolkit doesn't yet have support for importing the cal coefficients from the XML.conf files, but we hope to be adding those soon. Fathom, on the other hand, does support the processing and reading in of those. So if you don't mind using our stock calculations, we're free to using Fathom to do those calculations.
And then we have a question, are you working to integrate a Python module in Fathom, or have you left that idea?
I still have hopes that we can bring it back in. It's certainly not a joy as a developer to have to maintain two paths of separate code. Especially, I mentioned there are some slight differences that we found based upon the GSW toolkits that we're using in both the Fathom code as well as the toolkit itself. Some slight differences there, and rounding and those sorts of things. But it just proved to be, we put perhaps more time than we should have into trying to integrate the Python code into Fathom directly. But I still have hopes that as packages develop and code develops, we may be able to bring that back in and only have to maintain the one line of processing code.
Great. We have a question asking if there's a manual that suggests values for the alignment of the various variables per instrument. And also, is there a manual that explains what kind of window filters and their threshold values that make sense for each sensor and variable?
I glossed through it kind of quickly. There are some suggestions within the Jupyter notebook regarding each of the modules. If not, I'd suggest you reach out to our support team. They can point you to other documentation that's available on those, or help you directly.
What is the minimum laptop or PC architecture requirement to run this program? Oh, it looks like Ryan is maybe typing an answer there.
Okay, that's Ryan.
Yeah, it's just basically the minimum requirements for Python. Was it 3.7 version of Python, right? We're using?
We're using 3.9.
3.9, yeah. So any computer that can run 3.9 Python, you can look those requirements up. You'll be able to run this toolkit. Of course, if you have a really huge data set or processing a lot of data, it might be a little bit more time intensive, but anything that can run that should be fine.
Right. As usual with computers, more memory and more CPU power definitely helps.
Then we have a question for wild edit. Are there rules for what kind of threshold values make sense for each variable in order to mark them as bad or exclude them from the data?
I will have to admit, I do not have a lot of experience with wild edit. Again, that's an option where you can refer to what the documentation that's in the Jupyter notebook, or reach out to our support team for specifics on that.
Not sure if this is a question that fits for this, but we'll see. Which variables need alignment in SBE 25 plus?
Again, I'm no expert on that. I suggest you reach out to the support team. Oh, I forgot to bring up, let me go ahead and share the resource screen here. Part of the PDF as well. Here, so yeah, here's that list of resources. We'll see if we can't make this available to you as well. But just those general resources. What triggered me on this is here's our support email for you to reach out to support, or go to the CBIRD website, click on support and click contact support from there. And that will get you there as well. I guess whilst we're here, some other convenient references: Python itself, well, the repository and the PyPI project, URLs, stuff about Git, the Git GUI, various Git GUI clients. There is more than the GitHub desktop GUI application for that. A lot of power users just like using the Git command line. References for Visual Studio Code, and then some business about if you're new to virtual environments, there's some good documentation here on using virtual environments in VS Code, as well as if you're interested in more about Jupyter notebooks, there's a reference there as well. Likewise, if you have any other questions on any of the resources that I found useful in developing this presentation, reach out to support, look at your questions too, and we can get back to you.
We have another question. Can I contribute to this code in some way with the adaptations I created for the SVE 37 SMP?
Of course, please reach out to our support team with just a brief email. If you have it in a repository somewhere else and are willing to share a link to that repo, let us know. We'll take a look at it and see how well it fits in, and if we have the resources to bring it in and or when. As I mentioned before, at least at this point, we're not just opening things up for people to just submit pull requests as they see fit. We want to vet those a little bit first and see how that goes. But someday, perhaps, we will have this with the ability for customers and other members of the community to just simply submit pull requests to the repository itself.
Like that may be all of the questions we have. As I mentioned, the session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. So if you are interested in revisiting it, you'll be able to there. There will also be a survey popping up in your browser when the webinar ends, asking you for your feedback. If you would take a minute or two to fill that out, we really appreciate it. And that helps us make SVU better for the next year. So with that, I think we can end it. And thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And thanks everybody for attending.
Right. Bye.